Chaim. Welcome everybody to the Farbrengen for Gimmel Tamuz, Tofshin Pei. It's the night after Gimmel Tamuz, leading into Daled Tamuz, and there's a certain feeling of incompleteness. I mean, every Gimmel Tamuz, perhaps, we always feel like there's that sense that the day comes and we begin to prepare and get ourselves ready for the great, awesome day. And then when the day ends, some of us feel inspired and motivated. Some of us feel maybe a little bit let down, disappointed. We expect and we hope, obviously, that it's the last Gimmel Tamuz in Golus. But especially this year with, unfortunately, the COVID-19 and the struggles that are going outside of us, in the world outside of us, it creates even a greater sense of sadness. The day of Gimmel Tamuz just highlights even more how much we are in Golus and how real Golus is, and how much of a necessity is there for us to try to bring the final redemption, the Gula Mitzvah Hashlema, that it should be in a revealed way, in an ultimate way. It should be brought down here or revealed down here. Take it from Yad Mamish. So L'chaim, the Rebbe always emphasized that the day after an event, in a way, is always greater than the event, the day itself. For some of us, it's coming to the end of the day. For others, the day has already passed. Here in Los Angeles, it's not yet officially Tzeis HaKechavim, so it's still somewhat part of the day of Gimmel Tamuz. But the effects, the inspirations, the messages that people have had or felt over the day of Gimmel Tamuz, I'm sure, are still lingering and still fresh. And perhaps we could utilize these moments together to be able to capture some more inspiration, a deeper sense and a deeper feeling, not just for the day of Gimmel Tamuz, but more importantly and more specifically, the mission that we're all here to accomplish, and the mission that the Rebbe stood for. And what does that mean for us, and how do we actually identify ourselves with this mission? I was asked by a number of people over the course of the 24 hours, do we say Good Yom Tov? How do we greet each other on a day like Gimmel Tamuz? Do we say Good Yom Tov? Is it a Yom Tov? So the question always bothered me. I think it's a real valid question. From the perspective of Gimmel Tamuz, in the sense of the day that the Frierdiker Rebbe was told that he's not going to be, the death penalty was removed, the punishment of death was taken away. So there was a certain Yom Tov already, as the Rebbe really was the one who highlighted the day of Gimmel Tamuz as the beginning of the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe. There's a letter of the Rebbe about whether you say Tachanun on Gimmel Tamuz and all that. But for us living after the fact, the Gemara tells us that there's the Gemara is speaking about the fact how there was such a thing called the Megillas Tainus, that they had a certain calendar that they kept. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch, the certain days of the year that they celebrated as certain Yom Tovim, and certain days that you're not supposed to fast and all that. And the Gemara asks, why don't we keep this day? Why don't we keep these days anymore? These special Yom Tovim. And likewise, the Gemara also focuses on certain harsh days, and the Megillah focuses on some negative events, and therefore days that we fast on. So the Gemara says that the Megillah's kindness was bottled. So the Gemara wants to know, why is it bottled? So one of the approaches in the Gemara is the fact that now in Golus, unfortunately, we have so much negativity that goes on, it completely outdoes and outweighs any of the positives that may have happened years before. And to some extent, perhaps, there could be the feeling that, the Gimmel Tamuz that we're more familiar with, the Gimmel Tamuz that we have lived through and that we're still living through, it takes precedence over the former Gimmel Tamuz. So then the question becomes, so what is the day? What is the day of Gimmel Tamuz? Is it a day of celebration? Is it a Yom Tov on some level? Is it a day that we're supposed to feel joyous? Is it a day that we're supposed to feel a sense of, is it a positive day? Is it a negative day? So this is the question that's been bothering me for years. And it's a question that was asked this year. So a number of people have asked this question to me. So my response was, I don't know, it's very difficult how to relate to this day. It feels very very hard to have a proper feeling towards the day. But as I was speaking to someone about this particular point, so someone mentioned to me, I think, a very good insight. We were talking about it, and I said that the day of Gimmel Tamuz, the original Gimmel Tamuz, or the Gimmel Tamuz that in Chabad history, the first Gimmel Tamuz, as we mentioned before, the day that the Frierdiker Rebbe was officially told that the death penalty will be removed. So it wasn't necessarily seen as a Yom Tov, it wasn't necessarily seen as a day of Geula. But then over the course of time, it was recognized as the beginning, we could call it the Heschalta, the Geula, the beginning of the Geula. So I was talking to this particular individual, and I was saying that, for us, Gimmel Tamuz, we see more the Helen, we see the concealment of Gimmel Tamuz, but obviously deep down in the Helen, there obviously is this day contains within it a tremendous level of Gili, tremendous level of revelation. So he mentioned to me something which I think is worthwhile sharing, and an idea that I think we could all perhaps take in the sense of Gimmel Tamuz. And he said the very first Gimmel Tamuz brought in Tanakh is known as the day of Shemesh by Yeshua. The Yeshua was the war that the Yidden were fighting. The Yidden were fighting with Amalek, and they were waging a war. And it's a Shemesh begivin doim, that Yeshua held up the sun, because if the way it used to work in the war in those days, that once the sun set, so then the war they stopped fighting that day. But the Yidden were on an attack, and if they would have had more time, they would have been able to defeat the enemy. So it says that Yeshua held up the sun. The Gemara explains the whole Gemara calculating exactly how much time the sun was stayed up for, and how it was made up for later, or whatever it is. But this particular person was said that despite the fact that the sun miraculously stood in the sky, meaning the sun didn't set, the Jews still had to battle. The Jews still had to win the war. Yes, the sun was out there. Yes, they had the advantage of the sun not setting. But it didn't take away from the necessity of the moment, which was to win, to defeat the enemy. And I think on some level, that message of Gimmel Tamuz is very true. And that is not that necessarily Gimmel Tamuz is the sun is shining. In fact, we feel that the sun, to some extent, has set, not obviously spiritually, but physically. We don't see the Rebbe. We can't be in the presence of the Rebbe in the same physical way as we some of us had, and others have not had at all. But on some level, we know the day of Gimmel Tamuz represents, as the Rebbe mentions this idea, and this is an idea expressed in Chassidus, is the idea of when all the actions, the shleimus keichesov, the sense of the completion of the person's avodah, the Rebbe's avodah, all comes together and is elevated, has an aliyah, and that creates a corresponding effect downwards. That lamata in this world, there's a surge of energy, a greater amount of energy being brought down into this physical world. And his students, as those of us who learned the chapter of Tanya, chapter 27, letter 27 of Igeres HaKodesh, where the Alter Rebbe explains that the death of a tzaddik doesn't mean that the tzaddik is not influencing his followers, but on the contrary, he's influencing even more. And those who are connected to him get a tremendous amount of blessing and power and inspiration, etc. And especially on the day of the Histalkus, that is even on a much greater level. So from the one hand, Gimmel Tamuz is a time where we're empowered, literally empowered with the power of what the Rebbe is giving us. All the Rebbe's teachings, which hopefully we'll be able to focus on some of the core lessons of the Rebbe's teachings for us, is all being highlighted on the day of Gimmel Tamuz, and is being intensified. That energy is being intensified and is being brought on a very, very real level. So it's like the sun is shining. We have the Mesinas Koyach. We have the power being given to us. But at the same time, we have to utilize that. And we have to battle. We have to win the war. It's not enough that we just have this power, we have this ability, but we actually have to then utilize this power and maximize this power and bring about what the purpose of having this power is. You know, there are many people that are very talented, and one of the greater, obviously not ironies, but unfortunately one of the greater, the way the Eibusher made the world is that those who have milas in certain areas, they have chesronis in other areas. A person could be very talented, but because they're very talented, they lack the ability to bring out their talent. They lack the motivation, the ambition, to some extent, the wherewithal to be able to actually bring out in a real practical way their talent, whether it's creative talent, musical talent, intellectual talent, whatever it may be. And the talent goes wasted. And obviously that's a very sad thing. Besides the fact that we know that God created every man unique, and every person has a unique talent, so therefore everybody has to utilize their talent that they have. But then generally, when you see someone that has unique talent and they're missing the missing link, so to speak, to get that talent, actualized, it's a very sad thing to see. And for us, some of us perhaps may feel that we're aware of the day of Gimmel Tamuz, that there's a tremendous surge of energy, as we said before, whatever it may be, but we don't necessarily feel like, so where do we go with it? Where's the tools? From where do we get the proper tools to be able to now utilize this power and make it happen? So again, Gimmel Tamuz is this tremendous energy, this tremendous light. I think it incorporates, like in Kippur, the day that we're the Achas Bashana, the day that we're experiencing a revelation of God Himself, of an essence, and therefore we're tremendously empowered. And those of us who connect more, prepared more, invested more, obviously get a deeper dose, a more powerful dose of this power. But then what does it mean to implement this power? What is this power meant for? What are we connecting to? And therefore, what are we trying to accomplish with this power? So the sun is not setting in the sense that we're getting it. The sun is in the sky today more. The energy is more. The sun is in the sky. But now we have to battle, we have to win the war, we have to push, we have to persevere, and we have to make sure that we utilize this energy, this power. So let's talk a little bit about the Rebbe's mission. What was the Rebbe's mission for himself and his mission for his Hasidim? Obviously, you'll speak to big mashpiyim, people who experienced living with the Rebbe, talking to the Rebbe, private yichidison with the Rebbe, shluchim, etc. You get a certain perspective that obviously the Rebbe's mission was to spread the message of Yiddishkeit, Judaism, throughout the whole world. And the Eibishter's Malchus, the Eibishter's kingship should be all over the world. That's obviously what the Rebbe stood for, as being the Nasi Hador, as being the leader of the generation, having the responsibility of every single Jewish member of the generation and non-Jewish member of the generation. So the Rebbe's mission seems to be clear. Sending shluchim throughout the world is spreading that light, is spreading that message of Judaism, of God, the 7 mitzvahs, the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, to make the world a place that God feels comfortable. So that's the general picture we get of what the Rebbe's mission was, the Rebbe's vision, mission for himself and mission for us. The Rebbe once described that he said it's about the Frierdiker Rebbe, but he obviously whatever he said on the Frierdiker Rebbe refers to himself. And he said about the Frierdiker Rebbe that the Frierdiker Rebbe wasn't able to go to every single corner in the world himself, because being in a body, a limited body, he could only be at a certain places at certain times. So he needed foot soldiers. He needed the reglayim. He needed the people with the feet that could go all around. But just like the head doesn't go without the feet, but when the feet go, the head goes wherever the feet go. Likewise, says the Rebbe, wherever the shluchim are sent, wherever the Frierdiker Rebbe sent out the shluchim, the Rebbe is there with them. That means the Rebbe's mission is being completed and being fulfilled through the shluchim, and therefore the Rebbe explains how much when a shliach actually fulfills his mission, he's bringing the Rebbe literally in that place. He's accomplishing the mission for the Rebbe in that particular place, wherever he is. This is, I think, a very general and obvious perspective of what the Rebbe stood for. What did the Rebbe represent? What was the message that the Rebbe gave over for over 40 years of Nesius, of leadership in the physical body? And obviously, the Rebbe hasn't stopped leading us since Tafshin Yud and Tafshin Yud Aleph. But there's one thing, perhaps, that is really the essence of what the Rebbe stood for, the mission that the Rebbe lived and dreamed for, and the mission that the Rebbe wanted of every single one of his Chassidim, and for mankind as a whole. I want to first preface a number of points. In today's age, today's day and age, we call it the New Age. There's different stages of existence. So we have the New Age, whatever that means. In today's day and age, we're very, what I like to call psycho-conscious. What do I mean we're psycho-conscious? That we're living in an age where we're very focused on the psychology, the nefesh, literally the soul. That's what the psychology is. It's the nefesh. It's not the emotional side per se or the intellectual side. It's the nafshi, it's the nefesh, it's the psychology. It supersedes rationalism. Psychology is not rational. I'm not necessarily speaking about the specifics of different types of psychology or different areas of psychology. I'm talking about the idea of psychology not as a therapy, but as like I said, as a psyche, as a human psyche. So there's a truth of the human condition. There's truths, and over the past 100 so years, it has developed into a science, into a way of developing therapies for people who struggle with certain elements of the human condition. Some people have specific struggles, etc., etc. But the idea of the psyche, the idea of the psyche is not a rational idea. It's a super rational idea. It's tapping into something that's much greater than the world of emotions, the world of intellect. Why am I saying this? What's the connection? So if you look historically, you see a certain progression throughout the philosophical to the Enlightenment to the current age. A certain progression, a certain development. You go back 1,000 years ago, and before then, 2,000 years ago, there was a great focus on philosophy. Philosophy is the study of logic, of the mind, of understanding objectively ideas, concepts, things, even people, the human condition, but all within the realm of an objective sense, trying to analyze something from an objective place. That was the main focus, whether it was in the secular world of the worlds of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, to mention just some of the non-Jewish, the secular philosophers, or in the Jewish world. Lahavdil, we have many Jewish philosophers. Shlomo Melech is probably what comes to mind the first. And then we obviously have the Chachamim, the Gemara, which discuss philosophical ideas. And then we move into the Reb Saadia Gaon in his Amunas V'Deis, and obviously the Rambam in the Bar Nevuchim. There is a certain general trend. Obviously, I'm generalizing greatly because each one of these individuals focus on a different aspect and a different path and a different way of thinking. But there was a certain focus on the objectivity of man, the objectivity of life, looking at life from a pure, cold, intellectual perspective. For those who have studied Mer Nevuchim, you don't necessarily come away with feeling a certain emotional surge to serve God. You don't feel emotionally connected to serve God. It's a intellectual pursuit, trying to uncover whether there is a God, proving the existence of God, etc., etc., with a lot of discussion about the nature of religion and Judaism, etc. Then there became a whole shift of thought of how we begin to actually know anything to be true. The world of philosophy moved into the world of critical thinking, which began to focus on really trying to find the scientific, so to speak, mechanism, the scientific laws to know what truth is. Epistemology was created. The study of trying to figure out truth. How do I know what is true versus what isn't true? And without elaborating on this idea, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, who've studied this or heard about it, it's not necessarily important for the Farbrengen, but that developed as a very strong, powerful thing. And that's where the world of science really started began. A world of enlightenment, the idea of the only thing that you could know for sure is whether it was what you could prove logically, and then there's a certain criteria to that proof, or what you could prove empirically, and so on and so forth. And with that, it forced the world to move into the realm of the emotional side. It was the realm of those who felt that we have to focus more on the emotional world, and the romantic world, the world of the arts, and so on and so forth, and seeing or experiencing perhaps truth through emotions, through expression of emotions, through feeling, connecting through feeling. That's been sort of the development that's going on. If you move down a little further, we reach the age of existentialism. The age of existentialism is the age of where there is no objectivity anymore. We're not looking objectively on anything. It's not about what I know to be true necessarily, what is provable to be truth. It's what I personally, on my own, sense or feel connected to, what I consciously or subconsciously begin to attach myself to, and so on and so forth. Without again elaborating on these ideas, these are concepts that have a lot more to be spoken about, and a lot deeper. To, if one wants to take this discussion on a whole different plane, it could go elsewhere for a very long time. I'm just bringing out in general this idea. From the world of existentialism, connecting to the world of psycho-consciousism, if that's a word, consciousism, or just say simply psychology, there developed a certain need for something beyond the objective, empirical reality to life. That's what came about. Today's day and age, no one cares for pure science. You have people who still feel you have certain people who still feel connected to certain scientific, truths, so to speak. The world of science is still very powerful today. In fact, we take science to be, the truth sayers and the knowers of the truth, and so on and so forth. I believe today that the czar of our generation is science. That we believe that science has the answers to all the questions. I think the coronavirus has proven to some extent that yesh balabayis levidazu, that whatever answers science may have, they don't have the answers to everything. Comes along a virus, a small speck of something that's not visible to the human eye, and creates havoc throughout the world. Millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people not being able to be cured, and who lives and who dies, no one knows, and there's no answers. And every day you read another article that this person thinks if you take vitamin D it'll help. The other guy says if you take vitamin D you'll die. The other guy says if you take vitamin C. The other one says if maybe you try this herb or this medication or this. They're catching, they're trying to grab straws, as they say. And that, so to speak, is the ultimate proof of that God is the one who's running the show. But that's a Maayon Ramusker. That's parenthetically speaking. That wasn't necessarily. But what are we getting to today? Yes, we believe in science and scientists, but no one's interested in a purely intellectual proof of understanding God's existence, the nature of reality, the truth of Judaism in a purely academic, or I should say purely objective sense. We're totally not in tune with this idea. And even emotionally, our emotions, if I could say, are so corrupt. We don't even have a sense of true emotions. We don't even know what it means to experience pure emotions today. We have been our emotions have we have been superimposed with the emotions of the world, whether it's the movies or the politicians or the society we live in. They've all corrupted the way we think, that our emotions are all based on a certain collective convention of what's considered right and wrong, and true feelings, not good feelings, and everybody's going to argue from today to tomorrow how you should feel or shouldn't feel, and so on and so forth. So to be really in tune with your emotions, that's also something which is missing. There's no purity to emotions today. So what people are searching for, what people are looking for, is something that is not emotional, not intellectual, but psychological. The world of the psyche is a world, as we said before, that transcends intellectualism and emotions. It's the world of knowing something beyond facts. objective facts. It's the world of where you know something because this is something that you personally relate to. It's an experience you personally have. It's an awareness, a sense of something that has happened or is happening, or something that you attach yourself to because of something much deeper. Take, for example, the person who's struggling with a particular, they're depressed, they're anxious, whatever it may be. And they'll go to a therapist, and the therapist will start hearing them out what has transpired throughout their life, certain triggers, causes that may have led to this type of feeling of depression, of unhappiness, etc. And a good therapist will be able to highlight, okay, this event probably triggered this feeling, this response. You suppressed certain feelings, your emotions were heightened and weren't allowed to be expressed properly, or this, and go through a whole different arrays of explanations. And you're listening to this person, and if the person is accurate, he's what he says, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense, meaning you relate to what he's saying. And the truer the words, the more you connect, the more you believe. So then this person, this therapist has now a power to be able to guide you and direct you and say, okay, so now what you need to do and realize is that X, Y, and Z is necessary in order for you to, deal with this issue. The way you treat or deal with your particular issue, maybe you have to change your mindset, maybe you have to do a certain therapy, maybe you have to, think more positive, whatever it may be. The idea though is that we accept the what the psychologist is saying, the therapist is saying, not because he's proven to me through mathematics on a paper objectively that this is what's going on. He's proven it to me because this is what I know to be true within myself. I may have not had the words, I may not have had the proper ability to express what's going on. He brings out within me what's really going on. In other words, he's tapping into my psyche. He's uncovering what we want to call the subconscious and whatever fancy words. He's enabling me to express the inner workings of my being, without proving it to me objectively or even emotionally. This is the age. This is the world that we're living in today. A lot of people that I've interacted with over the years. So if I asked them as teenagers or as older adults what their interests are, a lot of them have told me their interest is studying psychology. And this is a feeling, a need for some, a passion for others, a want for others to uncover and discover more about the human or more about themselves through studying psychology. But what does that all lead us to? What does that all come about? What does that tell us? What is that basically saying? That we're not living in a world of intellectualism. We're not living in the world of emotional. We're not connected to anything intellectually, really, or emotionally. We're connected to things that we relate to purely from a subjective experience. And if we don't consciously know this experience or understand this experience, we could understand it and know it from someone who could bring it out within us. Now you ask yourself the question, how does that connect to the world that the Rebbe lived in? Going back to the Rebbe and the mission that the Rebbe set out for himself and for the world and for us, how does that connect to the Rebbe and the Rebbe's mission? And it connects perfectly. It matches up perfectly. Why? Because what was the Rebbe's mission? Before we get to the Rebbe's mission, what was the Rebbe's message on a very basic level? The Rebbe's message on a very basic level is Judaism supersedes intellect and emotions. For many years throughout history, Judaism was an intellectual idea. Let's take, for example, the generation that left Egypt, the Dor HaMidbar. The Dor HaMidbar was known as the Dor Deya. They experienced tremendous elements of godliness, and besides experiencing godliness, they actually had a certain comprehension of godliness. it wasn't just the experience, there was actually a comprehension. Chassidus tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to infuse or reveal within the Jews in the Midbar a certain knowledge and sense, a real concrete sense of God. But yet at the same time, we find that the Jews in the Midbar were able to rebel against God day and night, seemingly. You go through the whole Chumash Bamidbar. We just finished Shlach last week and Korach this week, and you have in Parshas Behaloischa. It seems like an unending type of struggle with believing in God, not believing in God, trusting God, not trusting God. How do you have a nation, a generation, as God himself says, a nation ad Mosai? How long is it going to be for this nation that they're going to withhold with me, that they're taking away the fact that they saw all these great miracles and they were able to comprehend all of this? So what happened? It was an intellectual journey. The Meraglim loved the intellectualism of godliness. They were able to experience godliness from an intellectual point of view. God was something that they experienced, but also climbed through the rungs of intellect to be able to reach these deep awarenesses of God. The Rambam describes this, other Rishonim describe this power of connecting to God through the mind. It's an idea that's based off Greek philosophy, the idea of the active intellect, and connecting into the active intellect. Through that, you connect to the deeper realms of godliness. But that didn't transform the Jewish people into being real life, real powerhouses of God-fearing people. Now, it's not for me to speak about the generation of the Midbar. I'm only repeating what's being said by great Chachamim in the Gemara and the Rabbi, that there was a certain lack of this true feeling, true inner knowledge that was something that they could feel attached themselves to from a very, very deep place. And as you look through history, Jews in general were prized for their intellect. That was what, Jews are known as the men of the book, and they've always been known for their academic, superiority to some extent. And that, so to speak, has been the focus. Judaism connected with intellectualism. Problem is that intellectualism doesn't change anybody. Being able to intellectualize, philosophize, prove things from an objective point of view doesn't help change a thing. You don't become a better person. You don't become more actively Jewish because of it. It may be a nice reassurance to see that, you could prove certain things. If you look in the Mar Nevuchim, maybe perhaps you feel like there's certain proofs there that you could say, okay, this is a logical proof for this concept in Judaism, etc., etc. And without getting into this topic and analyzing exactly whether we have objective proofs or we don't have objective proofs for God and the world and all that, it's not important right now. But that seichel logic in itself doesn't really change anybody. Emotions. So we have the famous Sefer Chovis Halavavis from Rabbeinu Bechaya, who tries to show us how Judaism is a very emotional type of religion as well. There's the Chovis Halavavis, there's the mitzvahs that are related to the heart. It's not just about an intellectual comprehension of God with a certain performance of action. You experience godliness through making Kiddush on Friday nights. There's an emotional attachment. And the emotional world is very, very important. In fact, the Gemara tells us, Rachmana libaboy, God desires the heart. And there's been that trend in Judaism. The world of connecting to God through the emotions. Without getting into the difference between the Rambam, which seems to be purely from an academic, intellectual point of view, if you look in the Rambam, especially the Rambam's view, not just in the Mer Nevuchim, even in the Sefer Yad HaChazaka, where he explains in the beginning of Hilchos Yisod HaTorah how one connects to God and one stimulates Ava, he doesn't explain it through an emotional point of view. He explains it through an intellectual, objective point of view, through a philosophical point of view. Again, the Rebbe takes out the Rambam and shows how the Rambam really is incorporating much deeper things. But again, you've had these two elements running throughout the course of Jewish history, the intellectual and the emotional side. Coming to the age of the Baal Shem Tov, you had a split. You had the big lamdonim, the big intellectuals, the great minds of Judaism. And then you had the simple people who had the heart. So you had the mind and the heart. The simple people who didn't know much, but they had a tremendous feeling for God. They felt close to God. They felt that they said the words of Tehillim was something. And I'm not just talking about the simple faith of these people. The Baal Shemske Yid, the simple faith of what we call the Baal Shemske Yid. I'm not just talking about that element. I'm talking about purely a real, genuine feeling of God loves me and cares for me. And if you look in the world, in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe there deals with the fact of Reishis Avodah Vikar Bisharsha. He says that you can't you can't do Torah mitzvah without having a love for God, without stimulating an emotional attachment. Emotions is what is the impetus, is the drive, is the catalyst, is the motivator to be able to do Torah mitzvahs. Otherwise, we can't do Torah mitzvahs. Emotions are highly focused in the world of Tanya. Most of the Sefer of Likutei Amarim is focused on our emotions and how to stimulate them, how to meditate to be able to generate an emotional attachment. If you travel further down through Chassidus, and I'm not one who's the biggest expert in all the Maimorei Chassidus out there, but if you travel down and you start seeing the way the world of Chabad Chassidus evolved into the Rebbe Rashab creating basically a systematic structure to Chassidus, that you could open up a Samach Vav and an Ayin Beis and take a chapter and learn it and study it, almost like an academic study of figuring out the world according to Chassidus. You see that the Hasidim themselves, some of them generated more of an intellectual feeling to God, which were called maskilim. Not maskilim, maskilim, yes, but it didn't mean maskilim in the negative. Those were the maskilim. We're not referring to those maskilim. We're talking about a maskil, someone who was more of an intellectual. The Hasidim were known for their intellectual connection to God. And then you had the Oivdim. The Oivd was someone who had a more emotional attachment. That's what evolved, and you see the Rebbe Rashab in his Kuntres HaAvodah, in his Kuntres HaTfilah, a little bit. He recognized very strongly who is he talking to, and he's criticizing those who are taking Chassidus as purely as an intellectual, academic study, and their connection to God is purely intellectual. I mean, even earlier in the Mittler Rebbe's Kuntres Spilus, where he says that Chassidus is not just a pure, dry intellectual study; it has to stimulate an emotional connection. And this has been the general theme, even in the world of Chassidus, has been the intellectual side versus the emotional side. You can open up a Maimer, you either say it's a Haskol de Maimer or an Avodah de Maimer. Meaning either an intellectual one or an emotional. When I mean emotional, it's something speaking more to the person on an emotional level. Comes along the Rebbe and completely changes that whole field. That whole field completely changes. The Rebbe comes along, the very beginning, the first Maimer Basi Lagani. The Rebbe is not talking intellect there. The Rebbe is not talking emotions there. The Rebbe is talking Poyol Mamish. Now, that isn't to say that in the Rebbe's Maimarim, the Rebbe doesn't talk about Haskola and Avodah. That's obviously a mistake if one would say that. There's a lot of Haskola, and there's a lot of Chidushim, there's a lot of the Rebbe's novelty, the novel approach to Chassidus, adding revealing new elements of Chassidus to this world, from the world of intellect and the world of emotions. But from the beginning of Bashal Gani, Tavshin Yud Aleph, what you see there right from the beginning is you see that the Rebbe is focused on the Poyel Mamish, the thing that gotta get done. There's a piskam, a famous aphorism, a saying by Chassidim, a chassid is a pnimi, that a chassid is someone who is a introspective person, someone who lives within their inner world, their inner intellectual world, their inner emotional world. That's what a chassid is. I remember once speaking to someone a number of years ago, and he was bothered. This particular person's personality is one who is more of a deep, more an emotional type of person, a deep emotional type of person who is trying to work with himself or on himself within this world of a chassidus haknimi. But he feels like he's living in the wrong age, he's telling me. He feels like that happened, that he's in the wrong time. That's, so to speak, what they spoke about 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 100 years ago. Today, it's all about mivtzoyim, it's all about going out there, it's all about, going on shlichus. And we're having this discussion. And as we're talking about it, and we're describing this major change and shift that is in the Hasidim themselves, and obviously it's a shift because this is not just a shift by Hasidim, it's a shift by the Rebbe. So I said, I think that today's day, this aphorism, this piskam, a chosid, is a pnimi, the Rebbe changed and revolutionized. The Rebbe changed it to a chosid is an atzmi. A chosid is the essence. A chosid is someone who's in tune with his essence. The word essence is bounded around, is thrown out there as if it has some sort of meaning and as if somehow we could describe essence. Essence, by definition, can't be expressed, can't be explained. So there is no definition to essence. So by saying that a chassid is an atzmi, what does that even mean? So let us just look at some of the basic points of what the Rebbe's life was the Rebbe's mission that he gave us. The mivtzoyim the Rebbe gave us. The going out there on the street, asking people if they're Jewish, going around to the world and mentioning God to whoever you see, spreading the word of God and all that. You ask yourself a simple question. Did the Rebbe ever say that people should sit and have an intellectual discussion with these people, have an emotional discussion with these people? I mean, the Rebbe didn't negate it, but the Rebbe says, go out and put on tefillin on people. The more people put on tefillin, the better the world is going to be, the better that brings the world closer to Mashiach. Even in the Rebbe's sichos, where the Rebbe is arguing and discussing certain philosophical ideas, the Rebbe then automatically jumps to this point of where it's not about the intellect, it's not about the emotions, it's about the essence. Which basically, in short, means essence means the action in itself. What do I mean by that? So going back to what we said before about this idea of we're living in the psycho-conscious age and the idea of existentialism and how we're not really into intellect and emotion as a collective human culture or society, whatever the right word is. It basically means that for us, what's real in our world is what we relate to from a place that's way beyond intellect. We relate to things not because they make sense to us or because we feel connected to them. We do things or relate to things because of the very fact that this triggers something within me that makes me feel it's real. That isn't to say there aren't people out there today that still would like to feel connected to things. I've spoken to many people, and myself, that want to feel connected. To just say, do it because that's what it says to do, or you say, throw out all the intellect, throw out all the emotions, throw out everything and just say, do. I can't just do. I need to be able to understand. I need to be able to feel. We're not saying that we're rejecting intellect and emotions over here. That's not what we're saying. We're not rejecting intellect and emotions. But what we're saying is it doesn't begin and it definitely doesn't end with intellect and emotions. If you ask a person at the end of the day, why do you choose to do a certain, whatever it is, eat a certain food? They may start giving you explanations. It's good for my health, and the doctor said this is good for me, and all that and the other thing. But the bottom line is, if you cut to the chase, so to speak, what is the answer? The answer is because I want it. This is what I want. Or I know this to be good for me. That's where it comes down to. In other words, in our world, in our age, we're no more living within this intellectual versus emotional, the course of living through an intellectual journey or an emotional journey. It comes from a deep subjective experience and sense of truth is what motivates us and drives us in today's day and age. And there's a very good reason for that. And that is what the Rebbe has explained to us, that because we're living at a time that we're coming closer and closer to the days of Geula, of Mashiach, as the Rebbe highlights that the whole Hasidic movement is very much connected with the explosion of science, that whatever goes out in the world, whatever's going on in the world is very much connected with what's going on in Judaism, and especially in the world of Hasidus. And therefore, this place, this stage of life, this current age that we're living through is extremely, extremely connected to the very final steps of Geula. Because what Geula really means is ultimate freedom of all these other emotional or intellectual pursuits. Geula means the ultimate self being exposed, the ultimate self being activated, the ultimate self being identified. That's what Geula means. That's what Geula is. Not that we change anything. Again, we don't throw out the intellectual, we don't throw out the emotional, we throw in both, but it comes from a much deeper place. So what does this all mean? This sounds very perhaps philosophical, this sounds a little bit abstract. What are we talking about, poyel mamish? What are we talking about practically? What does this mean practically? What does it mean that the Rebbe said that everything is poyel mamish, everything is just the action, is the doing? Now you see by the Rebbe something very interesting. You see by the Rebbe, people came by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe, they tell the Rebbe, I just donated, $2 million to a Chabad house, in, I don't know, wherever it is. The Rebbe doesn't say, oh, thank you, wow, that's so great, The Rebbe says, next time you'll give $3 million, whatever. I've seen letters where the Rebbe writes to someone. I saw a letter where the Rebbe wrote to someone that this person obviously felt that the Rebbe perhaps wasn't acknowledging the great good that he's doing for the Jewish or Chabad community. So the Rebbe wrote to him, meaning the Rebbe sent him one letter, and then the Rebbe sent him another letter saying, I want you to know I apologize if I haven't acknowledged all the good things you've done, etc., etc., etc. But there's a reason for this. The Rebbe wasn't this slave taskmaster that wanted everybody to just do and not have a moment of peace and not feel any sense of satisfaction. That wasn't what the Rebbe's objective was. At least I don't think so. But the Rebbe looked at the reality of the world, and the Rebbe saw the vision of what he saw, the purpose of why we're here. And the Rebbe said, if the action has not yet been completed, if the mission has not yet been completed, why do we stop and praise ourselves, thank ourselves, and feel good about ourselves if the poyel mamish, the action, has not been fulfilled? Imagine you're in the middle of a war, and you conquered some territory. So now you're going to sit back and relax and say, great, we got a little bit forward. That's ridiculous, because at any moment the enemy could come right back at you and attack you. But even more importantly, even if you actually weaken the enemy, now is the point to even go further, because once the enemy is weakened, now we got to go with even more force. Now we got to really, defeat them, completely defeat them. If you're living at a time where we've moved throughout the past 5,700 plus years, of where the whole momentum has been going and pushing and progressing and developing into a state of where we're at the foothills, the entranceway to Mashiach. So the Rebbe couldn't feel like he could be satisfied with anything, because you're working at a point where it's like, you're stopping like right when we're getting to the end. So what are you sitting back and praising yourself or acknowledging for what the great work you did? That doesn't work within the purpose, within the mission, within the actual Peil Mamish, within the Tachlis, within the actual result or reality that has to happen. Now, this is a very intense way of living, no question about it. The Rebbe was a very intense person. As a human being, the Rebbe was extremely intense. And the Rebbe was an intellectual also. So the Rebbe wasn't just, someone who was just like, pushing something from a purely irrational place. The Rebbe was a highly intellectual person. But to the Rebbe, there was something greater. There was a truth that is deeper, that is more real, or is the ultimate of what I'm here for. And that mission, that point has to happen. God's designated, allotted every person with a certain amount of years in order to fulfill their mission. There's no such a thing as taking a break. There's no such a thing as saying, okay, I've done enough. Today's day and age, we're unfortunately totally, we're the opposite almost. Like we feel good, we woke up in the morning, we woke up on time, so we feel good, that's good enough. Okay, now we feel accomplished, now we can waste the rest of the day. We did one good deed, we davened, okay, now we could, waste the rest of the day. It's like we just need to feel good for 5 minutes, so we did something positive, and that's it. That's a result of a struggle that we're going to get to, hopefully, that is the crux of where we struggle the most in our generation, I think. But for the Rebbe, that whole idea is the complete antithesis to fulfilling the mission and the purpose, not just because rationally, but because the sense of truth knows that there has to be the completion of the mission. And now we're at the moment of getting the completion done. So what is the power? What's powering us to complete this mission? That's the power of the essence. That is the power of doing something way beyond an intellectual, an emotional, instinctual type of connection to something. It's this is who I am. This is the reality of who I am. And I do this because this is the mission of why I was entrusted by God to be in this world. And that's the way the Rebbe lived his life. There was not one moment of where the Rebbe sat back and just relaxed. Not because, again, it wasn't just his intensity as a human being, it's because when you're in tune with a mission, when you're a soldier that sees the mission that has to happen, and every moment you could be doing something positive and you're not doing it, you feel that you're being counterproductive. You feel like you're going 2 steps backwards. So Gimmel Tamuz, going back to Gimmel Tamuz for a second, Gimmel Tamuz is the time where this energy, this power of getting in tune with the essence is extremely, extremely highlighted. Or maybe highlighted is the wrong word. Is extremely l'chaim. Gimmel Tamuz is when the energies of being able to connect to this essence is very available. Let's use those words. Why? Because that's what the Rebbe's life was about. Just like we learned in chapter 27 or letter 27 of Tanya that the life of the tzaddik isn't physical life, it's spiritual life, it's the Ava, the Emunah, Ava, the Yira, and therefore the more you connect to the Rebbe, the more those elements are being given to you, those energies are being given to you to be able to utilize it for your own avodah. If the Rebbe was attached to the level, his whole avodah was avodah of working with atzmus, with working with essence, so that means we are now exposed to the ultimate level of essence that we could get. And as the years go by, we know, as the Rebbe explains, each year this idea becomes even stronger and stronger and stronger. So we're holding at a point where the energies are so intense. We're in tune, we're being imbued with an energy of being able to express the essence as never before. But a lot of people may be listening to this and saying, what in the world are you talking about? What do you mean by this? What is the practical application of this? What does it mean living by the essence? What does it mean just doing? What does it mean living with this soldier mentality? What does it mean that the Rebbe's vision was essence? So we've spoken a little bit already about the fact that we're living in this psycho-conscious age, the world of subjective experience, the world of sensing something to be true. And we find something very interesting. In our generation, in our age, one of the major struggles, I think, if not the greatest struggle we have as a human race in general, and specifically Jews, and even more particularly Chassidim, is we're living in the age of the ultimate identity crisis. What do I mean by identity crisis? So we know as a child, when we develop the first few years of our lives, there's a great, we don't know this because we don't remember it, but there was a nurturing of our identity, which develops through the nurturing of the parents in this environment, etc. And through that, it develops a certain feeling and a certain connection to an identity of kinds. We move older, we get into our teenage years, there's a new identity crisis of trying to discover who you really are. Am I the person that was what my parents wanted me to believe in? Am I the guy that is the religious boy because I was brought up religious? How much of my parents' influence should I want or do I care about, or my education, etc.? It becomes a question of identity, of who you are, who am I, what am I here for, what's the purpose, etc. I think everybody goes through this. I think some people more intensely than others, depending on how in tune you are, perhaps with yourself or perhaps with others. But I think as a people, as a whole, we're living in this age of this identity crisis. What do we mean? What do I mean by that? So let me just give a few examples of where you see this in the world. Today, the question of gender is a very big topic. Is there such a thing, or not whether is there such a thing as a difference between male and female, but to what extent is that true? How much of it is nature, and how much has it been nurtured a certain difference, a certain gender distinction between males and females? That's an identity. Okay? The discovery of America and then the foundations of the founding fathers, the idea of every man was created equal, is an identity. And for hundreds of years, some in America have felt that their rights have not been granted. And that's been going on today with the protests, etc. That's an identity. The rights of a person comes from a sense of identity. But even deeper yet, we spoke about existentialism, we spoke about subjective sense of self. Most of us, perhaps, live life in a very passing manner. We don't sit and think too much. We don't necessarily get bothered by the thoughts of life. We wake up, we do what we got to do, whether we're young teenagers and we have to go to school, or we're home and we're going to get a job, or we're going to hang out with our friends. We let the days come and go and whatever, and we don't really think too much. Or if you're older and you have a job, if you're married and you have a family and a wife with children, or a husband and children, and you have grandchildren, depending, the life keeps on, day by day, the same or a little bit different. Things change up. There's a wedding, there's a this, there's a that. Things happen, and the life could just keep on moving with this steady pace, and hopefully nothing too crazy happens, negatively at least. I think we've been living now through a very crazy time, so things have happened in that sense. But deep under the surface, there's inner tension. The tension is, who am I? What am I here for? What's the purpose of my being? Now, that isn't to say that this question didn't exist already from the very beginning of mankind. In fact, it was. The Gemara says that why was Adam created as a single person? He wasn't created with already his wife, or maybe according to some opinions, he was created with his wife, but even then it was a parts of echad, it was one unit. And the reason is because the Gemara says, a person should say, the world was created for me, which the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, which means the idea is that man has to see himself as having a mission and a purpose that is unique and special, and something that God planned out for him or her to accomplish in this world. That is the message of Adam Harishon being created as the first man. And throughout history, this idea of, maybe it evolved more as a question of societies. How should society be governed? How should we live our lives? Who has control over our lives? Authorities, the religious, the non-religious. That has maybe been the major, from the surface point of view. But there's always been at some point the question of, what am I here for? What's my purpose? But there's never been this openness. And openness meaning to the point of hurting openness, of real deep down questioning of, why am I here? And there's a reason for that. The reason is because there's nothing else to fight for. From a purely secular point of view, there's nothing else to fight for these days. All the major battles have already been waged. Yes, there are still some, struggles out there. There are some countries, the third world countries, that don't have food and don't have the same, easiness to life as us living in America, or even in most countries of the world. But as a whole, the majority of people are living in a very easy, comfortable life. To some extent, some more, some less. The major obstacles, we're not worried about our cow dying and not being able to milk the cow or plow the field anymore. I mean, we have our worries, we have our concerns, no question about it. The place went wild when the coronavirus broke out. Everybody, bought up everything from the store because they thought that the world was coming to an end. I mean, we've been programmed that way, to be triggered by this anxiety button to think that the world is coming to an end. But in the essence of concern, of needs, not concern, of needs, we don't really need anything as much. Today, we buy things not because we need them, it's because advertisement has manipulated and has, what's the word, has hypnotized us. The advertisements has hypnotized us and has programmed our minds to believe that we need the new iPhone. So every year, every 2 years, comes out with a new iPhone. Like, what's the difference between the iPhone that was 5 years old and the new iPhone? Nothing majorly different. It does the same thing. It calls the same people. It has the same WhatsApp. It has the same pictures. Okay, so the picture is a little bit more sharper. And that's going to make my world different, did it? We're not living anymore with this, with the concerns and the issues of necessities. And interestingly, the fact that with the COVID-19, all of a sudden the world got shocked back to reality, that there is such a thing as essential life also, not just niceties and extras and things like that. But to a greater extent, even today, even with coronavirus, we're mostly living with a very, we have whatever we need. So then the question begins, so then what am I fighting for? Or what am I living for? What's the objective? Is the objective to make $1 million, to have a fancy house, to be able to drive a fancy car? Is that the objective? Okay, so you made the $1 million, you have the fancy house, you have the nice car, now what? So now where do you go from there? So now what's the objective? You're 25 years old, you just came up with a great app that sold for $1 trillion, and now you're set for life. So now what's the purpose? So what are you going to do for the next 75 years of your life? Okay, so the objective is to build a nice family. Okay, so God blesses you with having a spouse that's nurturing and caring and loving and everything, and you have children that are growing up the best, and everything is great. So by the age of 35, you have the family, and maybe 45, you have the family of your dreams. Now you have another 50 years to live. What's your purpose now? I mean, this question was true 500 years ago as well. It didn't change necessarily. But again, then you could have been working, the mentality was that there was a general overwhelming feeling of struggle. You passed on the baton to the next generation, the struggles of your generation, so to speak, and you just kept on going and pushing till you could, till you literally dropped and then gave it over to the next generation. But that's not the way people look at life anymore. In fact, most people don't want to have children. I'm talking about from a non-Jewish perspective, because they're not interested in passing anything on. They're not looking for, that's not the objective. The objective is within themselves. But what is that? What is the life for themselves all about? Eat, drink, be married? What's the point? And for any thinking person, any person who stops to think for 5 minutes, and by the way, that's very dangerous, because when we stop to think, that's where a lot of these thoughts creep up, and that's where we become very depressed, where we become very anxious, where life actually feels like it's crushing down on us, because when we actually start thinking about these things, it actually freezes us up, and we become paralyzed almost by these thoughts. And some of us actually get very nervous and very anxious and very depressed and very despondent, because what am I here for? What are my purposes? What should I be excited about? In my own personal experience, I've seen a major shift between 10 years ago even to the current age. And I'm talking about within the youth, within the teenage group. 10 years ago, even, people had a certain passion. There was an excitement, there was a frustration, there was an anger, there was a certain, there was a negative upbringing, there was a certain challenge to their existence and all that. So there was still a fight within them. Most people nowadays, the younger age group, doesn't seem to have that struggle. They don't care. They don't feel like they've been threatened. They've been hurt. They have been made to feel bad. I'm not saying all of them. I'm not saying everybody's that way. There's definitely a lot of people who have been, negative things have happened to them, and there have been traumas and so on and so forth. But I would say on average, the average teenager today is just a basic sense of apathy. I just don't care. And that is the greatest excuse, or the greatest drug almost. That's the wrong word, but it's the greatest way with not having to face up to reality. I don't care. The very notion of saying I don't care, that there's nothing that you have left to fight about, that there's no passion within inside of you, that there's nothing that's making you feel that you want to fight, is the greatest indication that everything else has already been conquered. The millennials that is sitting at home today, who's 35, who doesn't want to get a job because he knows he can live off his father's, millions for the next 25, 30 years. What's his purpose in life? To hang out and buy fancy cars and hope his father dies young so he could get the money, and therefore just whatever, waste more time and more life and more money and whatever. This question is the strongest I think has ever been in history. You see within the political world today, who are we looking for to be our political leaders? In the past, there was visionaries of a country, developing a country, making the country successful, creating something, making something happen. Today, it's literally a political game of who you identify with. I'm not a politician, and I don't understand politics, and I don't really care much for politics. But at least from my ignorant point of view, it's you identify with this way of thinking. Okay, good. So this person should be the politician. This person should be the person in charge. It's not whether the person necessarily has a vision and has a goal. Yes, of course, if you're a person that has some perspective of, let's say, the economy, or let's say the educational system, etc., you have some ideas of what you want your government to do, and this, that, and the other thing. But overall, what do people care about? Who's the most persuasive talker out there? People looking for a plan. People are looking for something real. In a nutshell, life has become, to a point, life has become complete sense of an apathetic, like dry line of no excitement, no passion, no interest, literally just living life, or I don't know, I wouldn't call it living life, but being alive. And because of that, we need to create things to fight about. We need to stir some emotion in our life. There has to be something that gets us excited. There has to be something that makes us life useful. So thank God, God has created for us the opportunities that we could spend our days endlessly, either entertaining ourselves with the politics, or with the movies and the YouTubes, or the other great disturbances and self-destructive tools we have out there in this world. An endless amount. There is no necessity to ever really question and say there's something real, something true to this life that I need to get in tune with. Okay, there's some of us that take life a little more serious, and we realize all of this is nonsense, and we have to get a job because we have to make money, because we have a family and we have a reality, and there's something. But even with that, then the question begins, so what am I really looking forward to? What am I really trying to achieve in this world? In the Rebbe's world, as we said before, the Rebbe saw that we're living in the world that's right before the coming of Mashiach. The age of Mashiach is the age of where the ultimate purpose of why we're here is going to be fulfilled. That's what the age of Mashiach is. So as the expression goes, it's always darkest before dawn. But it's not just that it's the darkest before dawn. It's that the only way to finally crack into the purity of the truth of who we are and why we're here is only when we deal with the crisis of the purpose of why we're here. If you look throughout the letters of the Rebbe and the Sichos and the Maayon, as we said from the very beginning, there is one single theme throughout the entire all of the Sichos and all of the Maayon. There's one theme. The purpose of why you're here is to bring about the revelation of the essence of God in this world. That is the first Maimer of Tafshin Yud Aleph, and that is the last Maimer that the Rebbe was Magia, edited, the Va'atat Tzava that we all learn every year on Gimmel Tamuz. If we study that Maimer closely, and we think about it and try to ask ourselves, what is really the message of that Maimer of Va'atat Tzava? What are we really connecting to? What is really the inner message that's being given in that Maimer? You learn the Maimer enough times over the years, you begin to think you know it already. So you every year just repeat the same words with the same explanations, and sometimes, we do this a lot in learning. We think we know it, so we just keep on repeating it, and that's it. We don't realize that the first time you learned it, you never learned it. And the second time you learned it, you just began to realize what's being said. And the third time you learned it, you maybe begin to make connections. And the fourth time you learned it, you begin to see things that you never even saw the first time. And as you keep on learning, you see more and more and more and more. And obviously, for myself, learning the Maimer every year now for many, many years, I always feel, at least, I think I see new insights every year and new perspectives. So what I'm going to share now is what I've, at this point, felt about what the message of the Maimer Bata is, and how this connects with this major theme of what we're discussing here, this identity crisis. What the Rebbe basically leaves us off with in the Maimer is that the Rebbe takes us to a certain point. The Rebbe empowers us to a certain point. The Rebbe gives us the ability, or even opens up our essence, allows us to experience that essence on some level, allows us to get a glimpse of this essence. Many people who have experienced being present by the Rebbe felt like there was something that was supernatural of an experience that took place. I'm not just talking about, the stories you hear of people who were blessed by the Rebbe and they got these tremendous blessings and all that. I'm talking about average people just passing by the Rebbe. Last night I was listening to a number of people, some from Chabad, some from not Chabad, some positive, some negative about the Rebbe, but they all basically conveyed the same message of the feeling of that when they were in front of the Rebbe, this like certain presence that was just so overwhelming. This presence is the Karn our Pnei Moshe, Moshe's radiance, the radiance of the leader of the generation. It's a power that comes from being the leader of the generation. But this presence, this presence penetrates deep into a person. Any person who had a deep connection with the Rebbe felt that their life was changed. Now, you don't just change your life because you speak to an academic, to an intellectual, to even a very charismatic person. Your life doesn't just change because of that. The only way the life really changes is if that the person really taps into something much deeper. And even for those of us who have not had the experience of being personally in physical contact with the Rebbe and physical proximity to the Rebbe, learning the Rebbe's letters, reading the Rebbe's letters, reading the Rebbe's Torah, learning the Rebbe's Torah, there's something deeper that pulls you in, that sucks you into something more real, something more life-changing, something that is much more of a sense of truth, of a sense of a reality that's way beyond anything that you would have thought of yourself, or anything beyond that you could read from any other place. It's something so, it overwhelms the mind and the heart. It triggers something much deeper. This is the power of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe allows us to tap into a very deep essence. But as the Rebbe there says in the Maimer Bata, that is up to a point. The next stage is the V'choy lech Hashem zayizach. The next stage is where we, as the Shulchan, the Bnei Yisroel, we as the collective Jewish people, work individually and collectively to utilize the tools and to harness the tools and to bring together this experience and therefore activate and bring out into full fruition this essence into a real practical realm. What the Rebbe there describes is that you could have an activation of the let's call it the super conscious state, where you get in tune into something which is very overwhelming. You get inspired by something. And there's many people throughout that my interactions with people throughout the years, where I've seen how they've got inspired by Judaism, let's say, got inspired to do Torah mitzvahs, got inspired to live a life of Judaism, of being Jewish and all that. And then eventually it fades away. Not that it fades away because it initially wasn't real. It could have been very real. But what happened what happens is that there wasn't a real identifying with being Jewish or what it means to be Jewish. It wasn't my life mission, my life purpose. It was a moment of inspiration. A moment could be a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's also a moment. A moment compared to 1,000 years or 2,000 years could be anything between 1 day or 1 hour till 1,000 years. Could be a moment. A moment doesn't have to be a small period of time. But you had an experience, something took you, something drove you to some place that took you out of your regular realm. You weren't thinking, you transcended. And in this realm of transcendency, you connected to something deeper, and it therefore impacted you to just do. The Rebbe alludes to in the Maayon to some Yidden that when they were in Russia, the Rebbe doesn't spell this out explicitly, but it's pretty clear what the Rebbe is referring to, is that some Yidden in Russia lived a life of Mesiras Nefesh Kipshutai. When they had the struggle, when they were challenged, they lived a life of Mesiras Nefesh. To them, Judaism was the thing to fight for. And they went to the most dangerous of places, did the most dangerous of things, living under communist Russia, which you didn't get a lawyer if you were caught. It was a bullet in the head and that's it. And all of a sudden, once they came to America, it all faded away. Their sense of religious commitment, their feeling of fight within them just died out. Now, why does that happen? The reason why that happens is because, the Rebbe explains, these are my words, the Rebbe doesn't say these words, they never fully identified themselves as being Jewish. What they fought for wasn't something that they identified on a conscious level as this being me. It was something that they did because of, as Chassidus explains to us, the power of the nitzutz alikus, the power of the spark of godliness that we all have within us. That power is a great power, tremendous power, and that power takes us over. It really just takes us over. And we get inspired, we get caught up in it, and we could, it could take us on this massive trip. But when the dust settles, and then I have to look at myself and ask, so who am I? It's like the soldier who goes out to war. So as the war is on, he's a full-on soldier. Now that the war is over, so now what? What are you fighting for? This is actually a real issue for soldiers. They go out and their whole life has become, my grandfather, Olav Shalom, Rabbi Zurkand, he was a soldier. And there was an experience that he had that transformed him. I obviously wasn't around when he was a soldier. I mean, he was in his 20s. But from hearing from family and all that, there was an experience, and just seeing what you could intuitively sense of what happens when you're a soldier, it transforms a person into a certain, way of operation. But when the war is over, all that hype, all that excitement, all that intensity, all that, if it's not channeled into anything meaningful, it just crashes on you. In other words, people who go out to war don't identify themselves as that my life mission is to be a soldier, for this particular war. It's a moment that takes you over, very real, you're very sincere, but it's not your life mission. It's not you. It's you in, so to speak, a superimposed you. It's a you from, Yenenvelt you. It's something that is you from a different angle. In the case of my grandfather, I feel like he channeled that energy and that intensity, and he probably had a lot of it before that, to seeing his life mission as being a God-fearing Jew. And that same intensity that he had, he had a tremendous experience beyond the war in the army that obviously is impacted himself and his children, his grandchildren, even till today, and his great-grandchildren, that impacted them and me as part of that on a very real level, which may be different than other people. But the average soldier who goes out to war, the war is over, there's nothing to fight for anymore, so then all of that just, okay, so now you come back down. So you had your trip, you had your experience, and now what? Some people go into depression. Their whole life afterwards is all about just reminiscing with their friends about the war. That's the only thing that they could relate to, because that's where they felt a certain truth of life. That's where they felt a certain essence. That's where they felt something real. And now that there's no fight anymore, so it's, there was nothing to rechannel. There was nothing, not everybody obviously, but for some, there was nothing to rechannel it into something positive. So likewise, on some level, the Rebbe there says in the Maimer that people could have experienced a real feeling of Judaism, but it was a moment. And there are people today who feel the same way. Bali Tshuva maybe, people who are not so interested and enthusiastic about Judaism, and they come into a space, into a moment of deep recognition, of perhaps deep intuition, and there's something that takes them over that is superimposed on their being, and they go with it. They ride it, so to speak. They ride it, and then at some point it could fade away. Whatever the motivation was, whatever the impetus was, it drops somehow. And the reason is, again, the Rebbe doesn't say these words, but these are my words, which I'm trying to bring the Rebbe's ideas, I think, into a somewhat of a more relatable fashion, is that they didn't identify again themselves with this being them. This wasn't necessarily who they identified as this is me. That I'm a religious Jew who my whole life's mission is fulfilling God's will in this world. And therefore what happens is, if this has never been identified as me, so then it just falls apart. It doesn't, you just go back to your default, which is whatever you cared about before, and if you didn't care about anything, you go back to your state of apathy. In fact, maybe the experience may make it worse, because you felt something and you were inspired by something, and now you don't have that anymore. So you feel perhaps even worse. There's a greater sense of despondency. And what the Rebbe says is that we have been empowered by the Rebbe, by the Rabbi, to be able to get to the point where we could actually get to the experience of identifying ourselves. We could make that identification of ourselves. We could say with truth and sincerity and with honesty that I'm a Jew, and being Jewish means, and only means, fulfilling God's will, which is living a life of Torah mitzvahs. But to implement that identity, to truly accept that identity, and make that identity real, that's not being done by the Rebbe. That's being done by us. In fact, perhaps we could suggest the Rebbe has to conceal himself, has to move away a little bit, in order for us to now be challenged with this crisis of identity, to be challenged with this inner question, so at the end of the day, who am I? For myself, my own experience in life, over the years, I feel like there's been this journey. And from the beginnings, there wasn't an identity of being Jewish, and Jewish meaning living a life of Torah mitzvahs. To me, not necessarily that I had great ambitions of becoming, a famous rock star, but I had other interests, maybe some interests of other kinds of intellectual interests or whatever it may be. And through the journey, and through the growth, and through the development, and through the questions, and through the challenges, and through trying to work it all out, and learning Chassidus, and primarily learning the Chassidus of the Rebbe, there comes a point where you just say that this is truth, and this is reality, and this is who I am. There is a point of identification which is so real and so true. And not that you want to identify this, because it's a very hard life. It's the demanding life. And at this point, it's not even a gratifying life. Because we don't see yet the full impact of our actions. We're not experiencing the pleasure or the bliss or the promise of what we're supposed to be getting as a result of our actions. We're still, as we said before, fighting the war. We're still within the battle zone. So how much enjoyment, how much satisfaction could we really have? Very little. But when it comes from a point of identity, it makes no difference. In fact, the identity itself is the driving force of knowing this is who you are. So the sense of happiness and satisfaction is the fact that you're living your life for what you're here for to do, for what you were put here to do. In a way, that satisfaction is greater than the reward that comes afterwards, because the reward that comes afterwards is never never matches up to the living within the fulfillment of who you are. I've had this question asked of me a number of times. So when Mashiach comes, that means that basically we're not going to struggle. So if we're not going to struggle, there's going to be no feeling of work, and there's going to be no feeling of work. So what are we going to be doing? We're just going to feel dry, empty. We're not going to have any passion, not interest, no excitement in life. And that's the case. So what's the point of Mashiach? Why should I want Mashiach for? Right now, I feel there's a passion of something. There's a reality. There's a mission. What's the mission when Mashiach comes? Chaim. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't an answer to that question. I'm not going to get into that topic right now. It's a very valid question dealt with in the Rebbe's Torah as well. But the very nature of that question comes from the fact that you could appreciate that being part of a mission and identifying yourself with a mission could be the ultimate satisfaction in itself. For those of us who are married with a spouse, with a wife, or with a husband, with children, there was a development, there's a stage where we grow, and we're constantly growing in that relationship, whether it's with our spouse or whether with our children. And as we grow, there's a greater feeling of completeness. And the reason for that sense of completeness, partly, if not mainly, is because of the fact that you identify yourself as being the husband, the wife, the father, the mother, or the brother, the sister. Well, brother, sister, maybe not as much, but that idea of being part of a relationship with someone, and that you see yourself as being fulfilling your purpose in that relationship. And it's not about the fringe benefits that you get out of the relationship. It's about being in the relationship in and of itself. You're completely given over because you identify yourself with that. I have seen and I've experienced within marriage, you could go through stages where you could question your interest. You could question your sense of motivation. And when you do that, you actually feel disconnected and unmotivated. There are many times people go out and date, and they get excited about the other person, and they really feel in love with the other person, and after a few months, they drop it. Well, what happened? What changed? Now, this is not an answer for everybody, but a lot of the time, I think, or maybe underlying in a lot of cases, now certain cases marriages aren't don't work out exactly. There are other issues, but there is an element there's a point to be made that if you don't identify yourself as being in a relationship with this person, that this is what your life's mission, and I don't mean mission in that sense. Mission is greater, but the sense of that this is where you identify yourself as part of your mission. You're married to this person and having this family. If you don't identify yourself with that, then as long as it's going good, it's great. When it's not going good, you're out. But again, on the other side, when you're in it and you want it and you identify yourself being within it, it doesn't make it easy. Doesn't make it easy to wake up with your children at 5 or 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and have to deal with them when they're young, especially, or even when they're older. Maybe they're harder. I don't know. I have only young ones, but to deal with children is not easy. And there are times you have more, you're more up to interacting with your spouse, and times less. Doesn't make it necessarily an easier journey because you identify yourself as this is being you. But one thing is for certain, there's a truth about this relationship that is absolutely unquestionable in your mind, and therefore, despite the challenges and the highs and the lows, you persevere and you see this through. Well, you don't see it through completely because you're still alive, thank God. But you're seeing it through, you're working it through, you work through the things, you work through the issues. Because there's something greater, something more, there's something real that you attach yourself to that says, this is me. If you don't reach that point, then you're stuck in an identity crisis land. So who am I? Why am I? Why should I be doing this? So then you run. What we therefore run for is for the quick fixes. We run to the things that are going to make us feel good for a few minutes, and then when that finishes, we need to find the next thing that makes us feel good for the next few minutes, and on and on and on and on. Because we can't. There's nothing we identify with. So we keep on chasing, keep on chasing the next high. We keep on chasing the next, excitement. Because all we can look forward to is excitement, because the idea of settling down and identifying with something real, we can't, because we're too stuck in the identity crisis. I was recently asked a question. In Chassidus, it speaks a lot about bittul. Chassidus talks about bittul. We know bittul, Kabbalah soil, it's a theme. So the question is, bittul, Kabbalah soil, how does that work with my self-confidence? We spoke about before, we're in a very psycho-conscious age. How does it work with my self-confidence? This idea of bittul. Meaning, bittul sounds like I have to completely negate myself and give up any self-aspirations, self-effacement and aniva, whatever, and just do it just because. And that could be very destructive. That could be a very negative force on people. Being doing something just because, a superimposing aspect of action, the cognitive dissonance, the psychological trauma that creates is huge. So how does Chassidus advocate bittul, and yet at the same time we're supposed to be we're supposed to be positive in our relationship with God. And we have to have a certain self-confidence. So in truth, this question is also dealt with in Chassidus in some form. And there is a question of how much gaiva, yeshus, how much ego does one have to have, at least at the beginning of one's avodah. There's an interesting sikh of the Rebbe. There's an interaction, an exchange between him and his father about this. I'm not going to get into the broad discussion here about it, but the point I want to make is that bittul does not mean negating yourself. That's not what bittul means. Bittul is not an element of self-negation. Kabbalah still doesn't mean I just do because. In fact, there is no real Kabbalah soil and there is no real bittul if there isn't first a true sense of identity. Yes, you could have a Kabbalah soil, which means that you don't understand why you're doing it, you're not emotionally attached to why you're doing it, you don't even feel completely swept up into the action that you're doing from even a super experiential place, which we spoke about before, an intuitive, subjective place. But you identify that this is who you are. You wake up in the morning, you say, you say, thank God for bringing my soul back. I identify you as being my life source, and I know I have to worship you, I have to pray to you, I have to get myself ready for the day, and I have to do your wishes. And then you start your day with Hoyel Hashem Kitoyev again. You just purely acknowledging, okay, so this is true, this is true, this is true. And through davening, as Chassidus talks about, we develop a certain relationship with God, an inner, deeper soul searching of relationship with God, an emotional and intellectual to finally Shemona Esrei, which is the ultimate bittul state. But this all begins with the first acknowledgement of Moida Ani, which is an identity of self. Without the identity, we don't say the Moida Ani. I mean, we may say the words, but we don't say it with the meaning. We don't daven with the meaning. We don't feel our Judaism, or not just feel. We don't have a connection to our Judaism. Because the identity is the first and most foremost important aspect in order for us to get to the stage of this bittul and this Kabbalah soil. Once we get into the stage of bittul, then our identity is just taken over completely and just taken to the next level. But there first has to be the moment or the point of identification. In Chassidus talks about a lot the idea of the necessity of hisbonenus, of bina. We said before that we're not very into intellectualism today, but hisbonenus doesn't have to be an intellectual journey. It's a deep psychological meditation of trying to get in tune with your inner self. Shema, the brachas of Shema, before Shema, Psukei D'Zimra, is a certain meditative state of trying to get into a deeper self. That's the general idea. And what it's supposed to do is supposed to stir within us a certain passion, a certain feeling, a certain attachment to something. But deeper yet, a certain identity with something. In the Torah of the Rebbe, it's an identity of my essence, of that this is who I am, and this is my mission in this world. It sounds overwhelming, it sounds crazy, it sounds, earth-shattering, but it really is very simple. Think, meditate, allow yourself to get in tune with yourself, and then ask yourself the very basic questions. Why am I here? What's my purpose in life? And go through all the rational and emotional explanations of why you would think your purpose or what your purpose is. And I feel very comfortable to guarantee you that you'll be able to answer away every single one of those emotional and intellectual reasons. Not that they aren't true and not that they don't have a basis, but that is not the ultimate of why you're here. Now, this doesn't happen in one day, this doesn't happen in a few days, this could take a long, long time. And we probably keep on building on that. Every day we have to start all over with the Moida Ani. It doesn't just happen once in our lifetime and that's it. But that process of identifying ourselves, of knowing who we really are, is the greatest gift we give ourselves. But it's not a gift that we gave ourselves necessarily, it's a gift that we've been given to by the Rebbe, by the Nasi Hador, the Va'ata Tetzava, the fact that the Moshe Shebedoreinu has the ability to open up our inner self and allow ourselves, if we want, to identify the true self. And then once we identify, not that it comes easy as we said, but then the reality of it becomes so strongly, we so strongly identify ourselves with this reality that this becomes our life mission. Some days we're stronger about it, some days we're weaker about it, but it's not a wishy-washy, it's not in a crisis anymore. And when we identify that, we, as Chassidus, as the Rebbe says, we at that point identify our essence, which brings out a revelation of God's essence in the world, which is another whole topic in itself. It's another whole Farbrengen in itself, of our essence being an essence of God, and through revealing and exposing our essence, which basically means identifying ourselves as being Jewish. Not just traditional Jewish, or sociologically Jewish, or culturally Jewish. We're talking Jewish, as being a Yehudi, as being a Nitzut Tzaliki, as being a Chelek Lekam Emal Mamish, as being the created form of God's messenger in this world. And then we reveal God's essence, which brings about Geula, which brings about the revelation of Dir Tachtonim, which is explained in Chassidus. And the Rebbe doesn't touch upon this connection, Va'ata Tetzava. The Rebbe highlights this later. This Maayon about the Tzava was said in Tavshim Mem Aleph, so the Rebbe didn't yet get into that full mode of explaining how the essence brings us to the Tachtonim. That sort of happened later, in the later years. But the idea that the Rebbe leaves us off with is the fact that we, on our own, have the job to identify who we are and why we're here. And I just want to say that this idea, this message, sounds perhaps very abstract, very, idealistic, and not very practical. Some people come to Farbrengen, they want to feel, okay, I want to hear something inspiring, I want to hear a story, I want to hear a message that I can take home and implement in my life, take something serious. People speak about Gimmel Tamuz means connection to the Rebbe, means I have to learn the Rebbe's Torah, learn Chitas, learn Rambam, connect to the Rebbe's Mitzvayim, do Avos Yisroel, and they're all true. And those are all great inspirational Farbrengens, and they all bring out the truth, and they all are important, and they're all part of this job that we're here to fulfill. In other words, what we're saying is not what I'm mentioning. What I'm saying is not in contradiction to anything of all of this, the Rebbe's Mitzvayim and being Jewish in the sense of just basically living a proper kosher life. But what the Rebbe has been driving us to get to is to identify the fact that we're Jewish. The Rebbe says when you put on tefillin, you allow yourself to be aware of the fact that you put on tefillin, that makes you identify yourself as being Jewish. Now, the people who are brought up religious, like myself, we could go putting on tefillin for years, and we could go for a period of years feeling like we're totally, no appreciation whatsoever, because we've been doing it. Mitzvahs hanoshim ulumata, just a natural course of nature. Okay, we do it, we're brought up with it, and we question ourselves. So why do I do it? What's the interest? Is it real? Is it fake? Why? And as we spoke about before, part of this identity crisis that happens is when you start questioning and doubting your upbringing, your nurture, and you start questioning, is this really you? Because you don't necessarily identify yourself with this. You identify yourself with perhaps being a famous actor or a great, famous musician or a book writer or, I don't know, just becoming a very wealthy person. You don't identify yourself with Torah, mitzvahs, and Judaism, and God, and this idea of Derech Tachtonim, and all of these ideas that Chassidus talks about. That's all very nice. When I want to get inspired and I want to feel like I'm learning Chassidus, I'll sit down and meditate and think about these ideas, and I'll share my opinions about it. But then there's my life. Then there's who I am. So we unfortunately, some of us feel, we're brought up this way, so we don't have any attachment to it. But the person who's never put on tefillin in their lives, and they're told and asked on the street, could you put on tefillin? That could be a life-changing moment for that person. It has been for many. And there's one simple reason for that. The simple reason is because when that person puts on tefillin, they're not going through any calculations of why am I doing it, how am I doing it necessarily, or I've already been doing this for the past 10, 15 years of my life, I just keep on doing it again. They're doing this because there was something that was triggered within them that is so much deeper than all of this. There's a certain essence that they come in tune with. And if they allow that essence if they allow themselves to identify with that essence, that moment, then they're changed for life. I'm not saying every person who was put on tefillin has been changed for life. Again, there's a lot of work that goes with that. It doesn't just happen. It's work. It's a lot of work. A lot of work meaning a lot of acceptance. You have to be willing to accept. It doesn't take a lot of physical work or even a lot of mental work. It's like we said before about being in a relationship. It's not a lot of work to identify yourself as being in the relationship. You have to accept it. And when you accept it wholeheartedly, and you want to feel that you're accepting something that's real. So obviously, if you're living with someone or in a family type of environment where you feel like there's, it's hard to accept that this is your reality. So that's already, there's issues. People do have to discuss issues and talk about issues and things like that. And people feel the same way about their relationship with God. And there is a necessity to discuss certain particular issues. If someone feels like I can't identify myself as Jewish because, my upbringing, or I was abused, or because, this person said something to me when I was younger, my teachers were like this to me, or whatever it may be, you just intellectually don't connect to it, or whatever it is. So then those things need to be worked through, absolutely. But if and when you get satisfactory answers, you'll be able to get past those obstacles, the baggage, or whatever it is, then it's a matter of acceptance. This is the reality. This is who I am. This is my mission. This is my job. And when you do that, again, the ultimate accomplishment of doing that makes it that you become something. You become in tune, you become bottled, you become incorporated into something that's much greater, something way beyond you. Something that's more about the truth of life than just living life. I want to just talk now for a few minutes on some of the struggles. We spoke in general about identity crisis and questions and doubts. And again, the Rebbe really gave us the map to allow us ourselves to identify ourselves. That's the bottom line. Really, all of the questions and all of the doubts and all of the struggles that we do go through, if we're willing to be open to hear answers and listen to the Rebbe's advice, it's all out there. If you can't find it yourself, speak to someone who understands, who has learned, who knows. Some people are bothered by the fact that there's answers. They don't want answers. Or they feel, of course, there's an answer, it somehow takes away from themselves. That itself is something that has to be discussed and talked about. That itself is an obstacle within one identifying who they are. But the Rebbe really gave us a roadmap. The Rebbe really gave us a very clear GPS of how to get to where we need to go, of how to get to identifying ourselves. And then once we identify ourselves, as the Maayon Tzava says, then we are now complete. I like talking about what I believe as the holistic man. Holistic man is where there is not just my emotional side, my intellectual side, my intuitive side, my essence, it's all one. There's a flow from my essence all the way down to my actions, which is all connected to one purpose, one identity, one functioning unison psychology or psyche. And the Rebbe really outlines these things. Like I said, if we go through the questions and we ask ourselves, why are we here? What's our purpose? What's our mission? And of course, the Rebbe told us at the end, in the last few years, you learn it, you see it so clearly, that our mission and our job is identifying ourselves, which leads to the identification of the job of revealing godliness in this world, which means revealing God's ultimate messenger to this world, which is Mashiach. Mashiach is the king of God in this world, the physical manifestation of the kingdom of God in this world, which is when God is going to be the ultimate, and the whole concept of Dir Tachtenim comes to its complete state. And part of identifying who we are is identifying that we want Mashiach now. That is another whole aspect to this whole discussion that is really the truth of where we're supposed to be feeling. At the end of the day, we could be doing Torah mitzvahs and we could do everything and identify everything, but if we don't identify the fact that our purpose in this world is to bring about Mashiach, which is not what the Rebbe said, it's what the Torah says, it's what the Rambam codifies as halacha, it's what has been the dream of every single Jewish person. We say it in davening 3 times a day. This idea of bringing about the manifestation of God's malchus on the world is the ultimate purpose of why we're here in this world. We are foot soldiers in getting it done, and we have the benefit of having the Rebbe give us this power. This power has never been given to the Jewish people as it has been given to our generation. And that is another message that's very clear in the Maayon Tzava. The Rebbe basically says that Mordechai accomplished more than Moshe accomplished in his generation. And I think it's pretty clear that the Rebbe is basically saying that he, in his generation, is accomplishing more than Mordechai accomplished in his generation. I think anybody who learns the Maayon Tzava would be able to acknowledge this point. I don't think I'm being too extreme by saying that what the Rebbe is basically alluding to is himself, that he says that the leaders of the generation, actually accomplished more than Moshe Rabbeinu the person. And he explains that that's why it says Mordechai b'dorei shokol k'Moshe b'dorei. And the Rebbe is basically saying this about himself. He says about the Frierdiker Rebbe, but he then means himself as well. Because the same way he says it about the Frierdiker Rebbe, that Posek din alatzmoi, that he said that the Frierdiker Rebbe said this meaning about himself. So the Rebbe is therefore obviously saying the same thing about himself. And it's obvious that the Rebbe took us to the ultimate of this idea of the Raya Mehemna, the concept spoken about in the Maayon of the shepherd who shepherds faith within every single Jewish person, makes us become aware. If you learn the Rebbe's Sichos and you learn the Rebbe's Torah sincerely, it's impossible for you to walk away feeling and not believe. It's impossible for you to walk away saying, maybe not. It's not really true. I, by nature, I'm someone who's a skeptic. I question things. But it's very hard to question something that seems to be so obvious. It's like going to the psychologist again. Going back to what we said a few hours ago about going to the psychologist, and the psychologist telling you know what's going on within you? And I like using a muscle of driving a car, learning how to drive. You don't learn how to drive a car by someone telling you how to drive a car. You have to go into the car, experience it, and then you're like, that's what's going on. And as the more you drive, the more you start realizing what the person is telling you, and as that happens, you start clicking and becoming more in tune and more identifying with these movements. It becomes part of you. And that's what it is by learning the Sichos of the Rebbe. It's the same thing. You have to put yourself in that mode, and once that happens, you just see this happening. You just see exactly what the Rebbe is talking about, and it all becomes clear to you, and this is part of the Judaistic picture. Again, it doesn't make it easy. It's still a work. We're still working. We're still fighting the battle. The sun may be still shining. Shemesh b'givan doim, as we said in the beginning, but there's still the battle. We still got to wage. We still got to win the war, and it's a battle. No question about it. It's a greater battle today than has ever been, as we said before. But with all of that, the message that the Rebbe wants us to realize is that this identity is bringing Mashiach. Is we want Mashiach now. Is that the fact is that our purpose in this world is not just to fulfill Torah mitzvahs to get some schar and elam haba, but it's to bring about the ultimate of God's revelation, the shleimus haTorah b'mitzvahs, the Rambam says, of bringing Mashiach. And therefore, part of this identity of ourselves is identifying the need of Mashiach and my part of bringing that to fruition. And this is something a lot of Chabad people struggle with. A lot of us struggle with this because it sounds crazy to the rest of the world, and it's revolutionary, it's messianic, it seems extreme. But if you just think about it purely rationally, it actually is the most logical explanation of why we're here and our purpose of creation. Look at the word, the first word of the Torah, Bereshis, B'shvil HaTorah, B'shvil Yisroel. What does that mean? What does it mean God created the world for the Torah and for the Yidden? What does that mean? That means God wants the Torah to be fulfilled by the Jewish people in order for there to be the revelation of the completion of the Torah in this world. And that is only going to happen when Mashiach comes. You don't have to go to Chassidus to know that. That's basics. That's the Aleph base. Or maybe just the base of Bereshis. So this identity is much greater than just identifying myself as being Jewish, and therefore living a life of Torah mitzvahs and being connected to essence. We said before, the Rebbe said the Rebbe's whole thing was about doing. That is the essence. Well, this is the idea. The idea is when you identify yourself with it, so then you just do. You're just actively involved in doing what your purpose and your mission is. You're just connected to it as being who you are. You don't question, you don't doubt. Or maybe you do question or doubt on some level, but there's something, like we said before, there's something much greater than the questioning and the doubting, which overwhelms you and allows you to proceed and allows you to come to eventually a point where you say, okay, I can question and doubt, but it doesn't stop me from doing what I got to do. And with all that, it's behind the scenes, it's always saying, okay, what am I doing this all for? To bring about the shleimus of Torah mitzvah, which is the revelation of Mashiach. Which, by the way, the Rebbe mentions this idea about Kabbalah Samalchus. Mashiach is not just something that's going to happen. We have to be willing and ready to accept it. Mashiach has to be accepted. A king in Judaism is not enforced on the Jewish people. We don't believe in despotic kingdoms or despotism. We believe in the nation anointing and appointing. We have to create the king. Until that point, the king is not a king. And that's why the Rebbe's major campaign of Kabbalah Samalchus, or the Rebbe, at least people made the campaign of Kabbalah Samalchus, and the Rebbe strongly encouraged it. That's why there's a great necessity of Kabbalah Samalchus, because the king is, Melech HaMashiach is not just going to plop down on top of us and say, hey, here I am. And we're going to be, oh really, that's you? Hey, Shalom Aleichem, how are you? We've been waiting for you for the past 2,000 years. No, when we open up and accept that there is a Melech HaMashiach, and we're waiting and we're saying, Melech HaMashiach, I'm ready to be your servant, or be guided by you. I want your light to shine forth within me. That Kabbalas HaMalchus is part of identifying yourself and being in tune with your essence. And this is the theme throughout every single Maimer Sikha of the Rebbe. It's clear from the beginning till the end, this has been the Rebbe's message. The Rebbe built this up slowly. The Rebbe didn't just come out with it right in the beginning. A little bit he did in Basar Lagani Tavshin Yud Aleph. He said that we're the seventh generation, the last generation, the first generation of Geula. The Rebbe made it pretty clear that we didn't choose to be this generation. It didn't happen because we're worthy for some reason, but that's just a reality. Again, it's not because of any intellectual or emotional reason. It's purely, this is the facts. It's identifying the reality of who you are and what place you're in history. And we're in the seventh generation. We're in that place, we're in that state where we have to just do because that's where we were put and that's what God wants from us. And if we don't do the Rebbe says, unfortunately, it's Ki'ilu, etc. That the Yerushalmi says that if whoever doesn't have the Beis HaMikdash built in this generation, it's Ki'ilu as if the other way around. And that's a very powerful thing. So the Rebbe, the Ma'av V'Atat Tetzaveh, basically is alluding to himself by saying that I've brought out this etzem, this real essence of bringing about Mashiach to the ultimate level. No generation, no leader before that in history has been able to accomplish that. No generation has been able to accomplish that before. There's been no generation prior to this that has had this ability and has had this openness of essence as the Rebbe has given us in this generation. And if we're looking for proofs, I just want to bring one point out. And that is that the Rebbe, from any leader throughout history, going all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, there's never been a leader throughout history that has actually impacted the world on the level and on the scale as the Rebbe. Not one Jewish leader, either because they just didn't have the availability as the Rebbe had with cable television and just being being able to impact the world from that perspective. But even more than that, Moshe Rabbeinu impacted us as a whole, but that was to the Jewish people in Sinai and to maybe Mitzrayim and whatever. Look through all the great Gedolim and all the leaders and even the previous Chabad Rebbes. The impact on the world on such a global level has never happened. If that's not an indication of the impact, of the level of bringing the world the closest we have ever been, and we are, to the revelation of Mashiach, then I don't know what else is. And therefore we have this power to identify and bring out within ourselves this essence. I just want to finish off for a few more minutes to just highlight some points, perhaps, that people could take out of this Farbrengen. We've been Farbrengen now for over 2 hours, and perhaps it's always important to be able to take something out of it in some real way. I firstly want to say that I very much acknowledge myself in my own world, in my own life, the challenges that we're facing. The reality is that we do not have the guidance of the Rebbe in a very clear way. And that makes it very hard, and we mentioned before the apathy that we're living through. It makes it very difficult to feel connected to Judaism. It makes it very difficult to want to be Jewish even. To feel inspired, or to say not even inspired, to identify, as we said before, with being Jewish. It is very difficult. Because where's the revelation coming from? Where's the inspiration coming from? And because there's so many distractions, and as we said before, it is just so easy to be able to do something else, to run away into the world of the klipa, as we call it, the world of the chitzonim, the world of the temptation. It's so easy to run away to that world, whether it's drugs, music, and everything else that goes with it. So we're really facing a tremendous, tremendous struggle within ourselves. And the psychological struggles are even greater. Because other people in the past may have been more in tune with certain truths than we are living through today. Today, I very strongly feel that we're living in a generation that is developing a great facade of truth. There's a tremendous amount of dishonesty, of pure falsehood in the way our politicians, and I'm not getting into politics now, but just from politicians, from scientists, from the world at large. There's a place of where we're removing ourselves from the truth so far because we're living in this apathetic reality of where nothing has to mean anything, nothing has to be true, and we could deny everything as long as we feel better because we could just sit at home and do nothing. So it's a great challenge. It's a great challenge to even want to say, I want to try. But with that also is the knowledge that at the same time we're at the point that we have the greatest power to actually do this and to actually identify this truth and live a life on this level that has never been before in history. Never before could a Jewish person be in tune with his essence on the level that we are today. And what I suggest for everyone who is listening and who wants to share this message with other people, I would suggest that a person has to ask themselves a series of questions in order for them to be able to identify. That's the fact. You have to go through a certain series of questions, as we said before. Go through all your thoughts of perhaps what you think is your purpose. Why do you feel a sense of meaning in life, etc., etc., etc. But more than that, more than all of that, I think what the message that we have to leave with is, we obviously get inspired by certain moments in life. Gimmel, Tamuz, Yud Shvat, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. There's days in the year, in the calendar, that we get inspired. And at those moments, we're actually looking for inspiration. Why? Why are we tuning into a Farbrengen? Why are we staying up late? What do we do? Is it just to feel good that we actually did something on the day of Gimmel Tamuz? I don't think so. I think it's because there's something very deep within inside of us. There's a yearning to express our essence. And I'm not saying it, the Rebbe says it. After the Tzaddik, the Maayon there says that. We're yearning to express the essence. So what do I suggest? I suggest every person takes a very simple task upon themselves. The simple task is tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, whatever it is. The very simple task is to look themselves in the mirror and tell themselves, I'm a Jew and I'm here for one purpose: to bring about God's revelation in this world. And everything else, however important it is, making money, building a family, living a life of ethical, moral standard, etc., is all accompanying this ultimate mission. It's part of the mission. But the identification is that this is what I'm here for. Tell it to yourself, sincerely. It may need to be told a number of times. It may have to be something that you tell yourself again and again and again. It may be that when you wake up in the morning, you have to tell yourself the same thing. I am a Jew, and the only mission I have, my purpose in this world, is to bring about the revelation of godliness in this world, which means me fulfilling Torah mitzvahs to the utmost that I could. If you have struggles with your identity, you question whether you want to identify, so then find someone that you could speak to. Seek out help. But don't just stay in a state of apathy, of despondency, of a lack of interest. Have enough courage to face reality for what it is. Question and ask people. But I think with all of that questioning and the doubts, if you could really sincerely tell yourself, look in the mirror and say, I am a Jew, and my only mission and purpose in this world is to bring the realization of God's revelation in this world. And that is through doing Torah mitzvahs, which brings to the completion of the purpose of creation, which is bringing Mashiach. If I could sincerely tell this to myself once, twice, every morning, whatever it is, I have no doubt that eventually it will permeate and bring out that essence that we really have within ourselves. Because that is essentially what I believe is the Maayon about the Tzaddik telling us. That we, through V'yichvo Elech Hashem and Zayizach, by giving ourselves the opportunity to acknowledge and identify this truth, we will actually begin to live our lives on that level. We're scared, perhaps, to say this. It's like almost like saying I'm ready to get married. That is crazy. Now, with marriage, at least you know who the other person is. You at least see something. You get excited about something. It's not just the world of responsibility and commitment that comes with it. In Judaism, perhaps you don't have all of that other externalities. It's just the commitment, which is huge, especially for men. And then there is a lot of times there's been frustration and there's been a lot of baggage and a lot of traumas, perhaps. But allow yourself to connect with all of that. That's fine. Allow yourselves to be in tune with all of that. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with opening up and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. But if you allow yourself to open up and to be vulnerable, and then acknowledge and identify that I am here for one purpose, and that purpose is to bring about the revelation of God's kingdom in this world, there is absolutely no doubt with this power of the Rebbe that has been given to us to reveal and expose our essence, and therefore live our lives with this essence, which, by the way, is not necessarily that we're going to change I mean, for some of us it may be changing. We may be starting to daven every day with a little bit more intentions. We may be starting to be more careful about kashrus, being more careful about Shabbos, making sure that we keep our Jewish practices on the level that it's supposed to be. But in general, the life that we're going to live is going to be the life the way it is. Mashiach is Elam Kimin Hagi Noyik. The world doesn't change all of a sudden that I'm going to be an angel. But there's a real mission and a purpose and an acknowledgement and an identity that will make us feel and sense and know that this is, at the end of the day, the only purpose of why I'm here, and you therefore live that life with that message and that purpose. So I want to finish off with a l'chaim. I want to give us all a bracha that we should be able to make this identity. If people want to discuss, some people who have been watching and want to discuss this topic further and maybe want to ask questions, you could either personally message me if you have my personal info, or you could send a message through this YouTube channel. Ask a comment through the comments, or you could just email office@maayon.com, I think is my father-in-law's website, email address, and the question could be forwarded to me, whatever it may be. But let us all be blessed with having the ability to face up to who we really are. Break through the identity crisis to identify, to realize we are Jewish people. We have been blessed by God. We've been blessed with the Rebbe who has given us the ability to open up our inner self, to be able to do our purpose and our mission in this world, to bring about the ultimate kingdom of God into this world. Let us make it happen, and believe it or not, we're going to make it happen whether or not we really, 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 really believe in it. It's going to happen anyway. L'chaim, l'chaim, should it be now, l'chaim.